If your clothes twist, stretch, or hang badly after sewing, it's not your sewing machine nor your sewing technique, it's how you cut your fabric. Understanding fabric grain is the foundation of perfect garment fit and professional sewing results. In this video, I will clearly explain grain line, lengthwise grain, crosswise grain, bias, and selvage, and most importantly, how to place your fabric correctly before cutting, in a way beginners actually understand. By the end of this video, you will know exactly how to place your pattern on fabric the right way. Understanding this class will save beginners years of confusion. So let's get started. Every fabric has direction. Sewing becomes easy when you respect those directions. This edge over here, this is called the selvage. So this edge is called selvage. Most times it comes as a fringe. So the selvage is the tightly woven edge of the fabric where you have the brand name inscribed. It runs lengthwise on both sides of the fabric. So on this side of the fabric, this is where you find selvage. If I fold this fabric into two, you will see that we'll have selvage on the other side of the fabric. So this is selvage and this is also selvage. The selvage is very, very important. When you are cutting fabric and you know you will have some leftover, it's always advised to leave some part of the selvage still on that remaining fabric so that when next you want to make use of it, you can just pick it up and you will be able to identify where your lengthwise grain is. When you go to the market, this is for beginners. When you go to the market and you want to buy fabric, this is actually where they measure it from. They measure the yardage of a fabric on the selvage. That's where it is measured. And then on this other part of the fabric, this is where we measure the width of the fabric. So sometimes you might hear fabric vendors say that this fabric I have is 3 yards by 45 inches, 3 yards by 60 inches. So this is where they actually measure that 60 inches. But this is where we measure yard. So that's that for selvage. Now, the grain of the fabric simply means the direction of thread that makes up the fabric. In every fabric, we have threads that are woven in the vertical direction, and we have another set of threads that are woven in the horizontal direction. All the threads that are woven in this direction, they are called the lengthwise grain, and those woven in this other direction are called the crosswise grain. Now, this lengthwise grain can also be called warp, and the crosswise grain can be called weft. Lengthwise grain runs parallel to the selvage. That means if you want to find where your lengthwise grain is, identify your selvage. They run in the same direction. If you can identify your selvage, then that is where your lengthwise grain is. It has the strongest direction of fabric. So those threads that are woven in this direction, they are woven tightly, unlike those woven in this direction. So because they are tightly woven, they do not stretch, and that's why they are used for the length of the fabric. Most garments are cut on the lengthwise grain because it also gives durability. The length of your garment won't stretch after you wash it. The lengthwise grain is best for structured garments like shirts, blouses, trousers, skirts, jackets, sleeves, and menswear. I will demonstrate that when we get to how to place pattern on fabric. Let's go to grain line. A grain line is the guide line or arrow drawn on your pattern, while the lengthwise grain is found on the fabric. So grain line is found on the pattern, lengthwise grain is found on the fabric. Let me use this pattern to explain this. Now, the arrow that runs from the top of the skirt to the bottom of this skirt is actually called the grain line. It is found on the pattern. This is an instruction telling you how to place this pattern on your fabric. This arrow is instructing me to place this pattern on my fabric on the lengthwise grain. So grain line is found on the pattern, lengthwise grain is found on the fabric. When you hear people say cut on the grain line, they actually mean you should place your pattern grain line parallel in the same direction, parallel to your lengthwise grain, because this is a pattern instruction. The arrow must follow the lengthwise grain. This arrow here must follow the lengthwise grain. it must be parallel to the lengthwise grain. Now, most grain lines are meant to sit on the lengthwise grain. For most garments that we make, this grain line actually sits on the lengthwise grain. Now, let's talk about the crosswise grain. So, this is the crosswise grain. It runs from one selvage to the other selvage. It is perpendicular to the lengthwise grain. Perpendicular means it meets at right angle with the lengthwise grain. It is not as strong as the lengthwise grain. So look at this. This doesn't stretch. There's no stretch here. But here, there's a little amount of stretch. You can feel it. There's a little amount of stretch on the crosswise grain. So it is used across the body because it has a slight amount of stretch. So it will stretch and fit around the body. This part of the fabric is best for light structures, like when you're making waistband, facing, or yoke. Most times, men's clothes, the yoke is usually cut on the crosswise grain, especially those that have stripe. You will notice that the main garment is cut on the lengthwise grain. Then they will use the crosswise grain to cut the yoke just to give it a touch of, style and all of that. Now, let's talk about the bias. The bias runs at 45 degrees between the lengthwise grain and the crosswise grain. This direction stretches the most. So let's see. If you cut a fabric on bias, see, it will stretch. It stretches the most. But this doesn't stretch. This has little stretch, but this stretches the most. And that is why it is used for bias tape. You're taping your neckline. It is also best for drapes, flowy dresses, flared skirts, curved areas like armholes, and for making evening gowns. If you want something that will go around the curved edge without gaping, then you should cut it on bias. Note, bias is beautiful, but it can stretch if you are not careful. So always stabilize your bias with a stay. You can use paper stay or air stay or whichever stay you have, but just make sure you stabilize it. Not all grain lines mean lengthwise grain. Some patterns will say placed on crosswise grain, some will say on bias, and some will say cut on fold. So always read the pattern note, not just the arrow. Now let's learn how to place our pattern on the fabric. So the first thing you should do before placing your pattern on your fabric is to iron your fabric first. Then you lay your fabric flat. Place your pattern on your fabric. Let me start by demonstrating how to place the pattern on the fabric. This is a miniature pattern. I just want to use it to teach or demonstrate how to place pattern on fabric. Any pattern that has this arrow in the vertical direction is telling you to place the pattern on the lengthwise grain of the fabric. So that's why we said that grain line is an instruction on your pattern. So it's telling you how to place this pattern on your fabric. So I will take this pattern, I will place it on my lengthwise grain, and it says you should run parallel to your selvage. Parallel in this case means I'll measure from here. I want to maintain 2 inches. After I measure that, I will use my pin and secure the pattern on the fabric. Then I'll come to this other side, maintaining that 2 inches that I used here. I'll come here and I'll measure 2 inches again, making sure that I have 2 inches from the selvage. Then I will use my pin and also secure here. So this is what it means to place your pattern on the lengthwise grain of your fabric. It runs parallel. Parallel means equidistant. It means it's the same distance at the beginning and at the end of your arrow. You go back there and measure and make sure you have the same amount of distance. Let's assume that this is my back block and this is my front block. Most times our back block usually have zip at the back, so it's not cut on fold. Now this is also another lengthwise grain, but the instruction here says cut on fold. This arrow is saying cut this pattern on fold. So any instruction you see on your pattern, you follow it. If you want to get the same result, follow the instruction on the pattern. Don't mind this fabric, oh, I didn't iron it, but if you're making your own, this is just for demonstration. Make sure you iron it. If you don't iron your fabric before you cut, look at what will happen to you. Like if I have this thing now and I cut this pattern out this way, do you know I will have excess? By the time I'm sewing this, I will have more than the length. So that's why it's important to iron your fabric before you cut. Another reason why you should iron your fabric before cutting is some fabric respond to heat differently. There are some fabric that when you iron them, they shrink. So imagine that you didn't iron the fabric before you started cutting. When you are done with making the garments, you have a smaller garment and you'll be asking what happened, but I took my measurements correctly. So always iron your fabric before you cut. So let me demonstrate this other one now. If they say cut on fold, they are saying cut this fabric on fold. That means I will have to fold my fabric. Let me use another fabric to demonstrate how to cut on fold. To cut on fold, now this is Ankara and this is my selvage. This is the tightly woven edge with the factory name inscribed on it. I'm going to fold my fabric. Then I'll place this on my table. Then I'll place that pattern that says cut on fold. The center front will be on the fold. I'll use my pin to hold the fabric down. Then I will cut, observing my sewing allowance all around this fabric. So that's how to place fabric on fold. This pattern here says place the pattern on the crosswise grain. You can see it's the horizontal. For me to get this right, I will place this pattern measuring from the selvage to the grain line, the same way I did for this. So the first thing I will do is I will measure what I have here from here. Let me also maintain 2 inches. Now when you are doing this on your fabric, you are going to take note of your sewing allowance. So you are going to take that into consideration while placing your pattern. Let's say I want to use 1/2 inch for my sewing allowance. Then I have up to 1 inch from the edge here to the selvage, so I can go on with this. But if I want to use 1 inch for my sewing allowance, that means I will take the pattern further from the edge. So that means from here to here I have 1 inch sewing allowance. That will be enough. I'm going to measure 3 inches in this one. I'll put my pin, make sure I have a straight line. Then from this grain line again, I will measure 3 inches, making sure that they are the same. So I'll put another pin here. Then you can go ahead and put pin around the pattern, or you can use fabric weight if you don't want to use pin on your pattern. Then you can go ahead and cut this all around. Then lastly, we also have another pattern here. This is the pattern that says cut on bias. Cut on bias. So you also ensure that this grain line is also placed parallel to your selvage. I'll take it this way. You can see now it's facing the same direction. So in order to get an equal distance, you measure. I want to use 4.5 inches from the selvage. When you get the 4.5, you mustn't use 4.5. Just measure from your grain line. Then you use your pin to hold it down. I'll confirm again. I have 4.5 inches. Then you go to the top and measure also what you have there. I also have 4.5 here. Looking at this grain line now, you can see it runs parallel to the selvage and they are both equal distance at the top and at the bottom. Now we have learned how to place our pattern in the lengthwise grain, crosswise grain, and also the bias. This one step alone can change your sewing forever. Let's look at some common mistakes made by beginners. Cutting without checking grain lines, eyeballing instead of measuring, accidentally cutting on bias, and lastly, ignoring pattern instructions. These mistakes are normal. Every pro has made them before. Fabric has grain, patterns show grain line. When they match, your garment behaves. If this helped you, like, subscribe, and share with a sewing beginner. Until our next class, bye bye for now.